I'm not pulling on my driveway. We all know what that means. It's time for Other Drive to Work, Coronavirus Edition. Okay, guys, today I'm going to talk about the creature type gods. So the interesting thing is, magic in the past definitely had characters that were godlike. But it wasn't until Theros, the original Theros, that we decided we were going to make God a creature type. And basically what happened was, when we were making Theros, one of the things we said is, okay, how do we take, we wanted to have a Greek mythology inspired world, but how do we take Greek mythology and blend it with magic in a way that made it feel very magic? And the answer to that was, well, what if we had a pantheon of gods that were seen through the color wheel? Like one of the things that's really cool when we make a world is you want to figure out how the magic color pie fits into the world. That it's the most iconic thing of magic. That if you want a world to feel like magic, you have to figure out how the color pie applies to it. And the idea that the pantheon of gods was seen through the color pie felt really cool. And we actually had a discussion, like, should they actually be gods? Should we actually call them gods? Like I said, prior to Theros, we had cards. I mean, like, for example, in the original Kamigawa, we had characters that you could have called gods. And we had in Shadowmoor, we had a cycle of things that you could have called God. But we didn't. It wasn't until Theros we said, we said, okay, we're doing Greek mythology, and gods are such a key part of it that we said, okay, let's just do gods. So the big question was, like, once we had the idea that we're going to do gods and we were going to see the pantheon through the color pie, the next big question was, well, how do you feel like a god? Like, that was, okay, how do I make a card that says, this feels like a god? And so, for Theros, one that what you'll see in today's podcast is, we've done gods a couple different times, and each time we've done them, we've approached it a little bit differently. I'm starting with the Theros gods. We'll eventually get to the Amonkhet gods, to the Kaldheim gods. Adventures of Forgotten Realm have a few gods, so we'll get to all those. First, we'll start with Theros. So, the first thing we said is, okay, there's a couple things that are true about gods. One is that they're hard to kill, that they're impressive, but also that gods a lot of the time are sort of up away. That, yeah, they do it, like, even in Greek mythology, the gods did eventually come down to earth from time to time, but it wasn't often. They were up in, they were in their own, land in the sky and not walking on earth most of the time. So how do you create something that sort of has a sense of the feel of the gods being there, but also that the gods could show up and physically actually be there? How do you capture that? And in the same sense, we also wanted gods to be hard to get rid of. So early on, we made the decision that we wanted the set to be an enchantment matter set. And so the idea that we came up with early on, that's stuck all the way through, was that enchantments represented the feel of the gods, the sort of the touch of the gods. And once we knew that we wanted the gods themselves to be enchantments. That we wanted, in order to make enchantments work in the set, we needed to have enchantment creatures. So the set had enchantment creatures. And all of them were sort of creations of the gods. Well, if they were creations of the gods, shouldn't the gods themselves be enchantments? And once we decided we wanted them to be legendary enchantment creatures, it is good that we decided to go with God because nothing else fit. So we didn't have a lot of space. Okay, so the idea we came up with, and we actually built this first for the 5 monocolor gods. So in Theros, Heliod, Thassa, Erebos, Perforos, and Nylea, which are the 5, the sort of major gods, if you will. The multicolor are more the minor gods. We made them the monocolor gods, and Heliod was like loosely after Zeus, and Thassa was after Poseidon, and Erebus was after Hades, and Perforos was after Vulcan, or that's Vulcan's not the Greek name, but I'm blanking on his name, but Vulcan was the Roman name of it. And then Kylea was like kind of Athena, goddess of the hunt. So and once again, the monocolors had a little more direct influences. The multicolors, sometimes we join things together. Okay, so the first idea we had is, enchantment creature. And then we liked the idea that they were indestructible, so they were hard to deal with. And then the set had devotion, right? And devotion was a mechanic that counted the number of pips of a certain color you had, and said, okay, well, what if you had to have a certain devotion for them to show up? Like, enough people had to believe in them for them to come down. And so what we did is we gave them 3 abilities, basically, or 4 abilities. One, they were indestructible. So all 5 of them, and as I get into the other 10, they follow this pattern. They're all indestructible. They had a devotion, so they said, hey, if I meet a certain devotion, and the devotion was 5 for the monocolors, then it had an enchantment ability. So the idea is, even if it's not a creature yet, this ability still works. And then it had a second activated ability that allowed you to do something. And so the idea, that's how all 5 of them work. They're indestructible. If you have a devotion of 5, they become a creature. They have a static ability. They have an activated ability. And usually there was some synergy between them. Heliod makes 2/1 enchantment creature tokens, and then its static ability, it gives vigilance. So there's synergy. So the static ability and the activated ability would have some synergy between them. Okay, so that is how we built the basic gods of the monocolor gods. But then we decided that we wanted in each of the next 2 sets, so it was a block. So in Theros, we had the monocolor gods. In Born of the Gods, we had the allied color gods. And then in Journey to Nyx, we had the enemy color gods. So we decided we wanted to design the 10 multicolor gods the same. So like the monocolor gods, they were all indestructible, and they're all legendary enchantment creatures, and they all had a devotion. Now, because the devotion was for 2 colors rather than 1 color, all of the 2-color ones had a devotion of 7 to become a creature, just because it's easier to turn them on than it was the monocolor ones. Now, true, if you play a monocolor deck, it's easier to turn on the monocolor ones, but the idea was, because it counted 2 different colors, we made them 7. And then there was one sort of enchantment-like ability. On the ones we did, on the monocolor ones, we did a very simple static ability and an activate ability. But what we did on the multicolor ones, we just did one more elaborate static ability that would tie into them. And so the allied color ones were Aphara and Kemetra and Mogus and Phoenix and Xenagos. Xenagos, by the way, had been a planeswalker in the first set and became a god in the second set. We had never had a planeswalker become a creature, become a god. But that was Xenagos. And then in the third set, the enemies were Athreos, Eros, Coronas, Krufix, and Pharika. And all of these, by the way, we really sort of the creative team looked at all the sort of what are people gods of, and so we did different versions, and we did our take on it, harvest and war, and the people who, Athros leads you when you die. We looked and said, where can we do it? And some of the times we sort of combined things. Some of the times we sort of went our own direction. So like there were definitely gods of different kinds of things, but it was very much inspired by Greek mythology and the kinds of things that made sense. And we purposely just chose to make not all the gods even humanoid. Like Mogus is like a minotaur. Obviously Xenagos is a satyr. Eros is a centaur. So we definitely mixed it up a little bit, although there was no room on the cards to say anything other than God. So even though they had other, even though, Mogus is a minotaur, it doesn't say minotaur god on it. And we decided, because they were enchantment creatures, there just wasn't space, so they were gods. So we made those 10 gods. Okay, so the interesting thing is now we come along to Amonkhet. And we're like, okay, we made a Greek mythology-inspired set. We made gods. They were very popular. Okay, now we're in the Egyptian-inspired. Okay, we have to have gods, right? Like, it's Egyptian mythology-inspired. Like, the gods were a big part of Egyptian mythology. So, like, okay. So we sort of said, okay, let's follow, like, one of the things when you do something for the first time is you're definitely setting some expectations. But the second time you do it, you're even more so, like 2 lines draw a line, 2 dots draw a line. So like we wanted to say, well, what was inherent to being a god, and what was, well, these were the Greek gods, but the Egyptian gods could be different. So the first thing we did was we decided that we were going to make them indestructible. I think our thought at the time was, oh, maybe that's part of the sense of a god, they're indestructible. As you will see, we move off that eventually. But early on in Amonkhet, like, okay, well, they're gods, they're indestructible. And so what we said is, okay, we're not going to make them enchantment gods. Enchantment gods and devotion, that's a Greek mythology thing, you know. We decided we're going to make them a little bit more real. Like in the story, the gods walk among the people. Like they are there all the time. You know, they're less of sort of this myth that maybe you run into, but you hear about, and more of like they're tangibly there. We did a big part of the story. So when we built Amonkhet, we blended sort of Egyptian with this feeling of Bolus. Because Bolus had warped the plane. And so what we had done was the first set has 5 monocolors. So it's kind of set up like we did Amonkhet. We once again divided the pantheon through colors, and the colors represented something. In Amonkhet, there was a series of tests. And so they represented these 5 tests that happen. And the idea was if you made it through the test, then you were killed in a glorious way. But secretly, Bolus was just trying to build a zombie army. So it turned out to be not so good. But I will stress, by the way, the gods, the 5 monocolor gods had no idea. I mean, they knew Bolus existed, but they didn't understand the larger scope of what was going on. So what we did with these gods is all of them are indestructible, plus they have another keyword. So Oketra has double strike, Kefnis has flying, Bantu has menace, Hazeret has haste, and Ronus has death touch. So we give them each an ability plus indestructible, so 2 abilities if you got indestructible. And then we gave them they can't attack or block unless a certain condition is met. So it was kind of like saying, like, oh, kind of like the gods that we did in Theros. They're creatures, and they're a little cheaper for creatures than normal, but you can't always attack or block. That you have to sort of have the right conditions. Now, the difference between Theros and Amonkhet is in Theros, it's devotion. Now, yes, you can lose creatures. Yes, you can gain and lose devotion. But pretty much, once you turn them on, most of the time they stayed on. With the Amonkhet ones, you had to meet a certain condition that was not necessarily as easy to keep or go. Like Oketra said, you have to control 3 other creatures. Kefnet, yes, you had to have 7 more cards in hand. Bantu was a creature had to die under your control. Hazeret was you have 1 or fewer cards in hand. And Ronus was you have to have a power creature 4 or greater. These were things that you could get, but were a little bit easier to change. Devotion in general, I mean, you can kill creatures with lower devotion, but it's a little harder, especially when, like, if you need a devotion of 5 for the monocolor, and like, hey, it's not that hard to get up to 10 or 20 or, to get higher numbers later in the game. And so it's a lot harder to turn them off when that happens. Finally, we also gave them each an activated ability that you could use even if they couldn't attack yet. So similar to the Therosian ones, there definitely is this idea of they come and play, they're a little cheaper for what they are, they're indestructible, but there's a condition by which you can attack with them. But even when that isn't met, they have this kind of global effect that you can use. So even if they're not attacking or blocking yet, you still can use their ability. And once again, the ability you're using, like Oketra, lets you make creature tokens. Well, you can't attack unless you have 3 or more creature tokens. So the idea was the ability of the creature would build up and help you to get there. I will stress, by the way, in retrospect, the fact that we gave him indestructible when 4 out of the 5 would be killed. Sorry, spoiler alert, 4 of the 5 get killed. I'm going to talk about their zombies in a second, so hopefully that become apparent. Everybody but Hazard actually got killed in the story. By the gods I'm going to talk about in a second. So the fact that indestructible is a little bit quirky, I mean, you can sacrifice them, I guess, but it is a little quirky they're indestructible when in the story they die, so in retrospect. Okay, next up was the Locust God, the Scarab God, and the Scorpion God. So what happens is Bolus brings back these 3 old gods who end up destroying everything and killing 4 of the 5 gods and lots of the people. And so we needed to represent that because they were Bolus, because it was Bolus doing, we ended up taking the 3 Bolus color combinations. So Bolus is blue, black, and red. So blue, red, blue, black, and black, red to represent them. Once again, the one thing we also did do, by the way, with the original ones is we flavored them as all having animals, like being animal heads, because that was really big in mythology for Egyptian mythology. But anyway, we ended up playing these guys a little bit different. One of the things that at some point, I believe, Play Design came to us and said, we stop it with the indestructible. It's really hard to balance indestructible cards. Even when you have like restrictions to when there are creatures and when they're not, it's still hard to balance them. So the Locust God, the Scarab God, and the Scorpion God, we changed it. So instead of being indestructible, they can be killed. If you kill them, they go back to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So if you kill them, you do get them back, so you can replay them again. So it's not that they have a sort of, it's hard to get rid of them, but not quite as hard as indestructible versions. So the way this one worked is that it wasn't quite as clean a parallel between these three. They were all multicolored, obviously. Like the Locust God had flying, but the other two didn't have a creature ability. All three of them had an activated ability, and all of them had a triggered ability. The Scarab God had two triggered abilities, and the Scorpion God had a static ability, and the Locust God had a static ability. So I guess all three of them had three abilities. One is activated, one is triggered, and the first one could be triggered, could be static. And the other big thing about the three gods from the multicolor gods is they were destructive, and all their abilities are very destructive and are harming things. Although the Locust God, I guess, is more making locusts than cause issues. But anyway, so those were the sort of the other gods from Amonkhet. Okay, so now we get to War of the Spark. So remember I mentioned that 4 of the 5 got killed? Well, it's part of Bolus's master plan to make us almost cycle, we'll get to that in a second, of zombie gods. So now for the first time, gods have another creature type. Before that, they had not. They were always enchantment creature god or legendary creature. They're all legendary gods, but they had no other creature type. Well, for the first time, we now meet gods that have another creature type. It's the zombie gods. So Oketra and Kefnet and Bantu and Ronus become God Eternal. So what we do with these is we give them all a keyword. We give them a triggered ability, and then we give them two. I guess we give them two triggered abilities. They're all two triggered. So they have two triggered abilities. One of which is their main effect, what they do in play, and the other says, when I die, you put it third from the top. So the idea is, if you kill these, okay, they're hard to kill gods, but they're not indestructible like the early gods. They're not back to your hand to end a turn. It's like, oh, they're going to be away for 3 turns before you can cast them again. So you're starting to see that we're starting to make it a little easier to get rid of gods. The gods have proved to be a little problematic. So the one tricky thing is the red god didn't die. So in this set, we made Ilharg the raised boar. So in the mythology, there was this boar god that I think, the Gruul prayed to, I think. But anyway, we brought him back, and then we made him function just like the other gods. So he has a static ability, a creature ability. Sorry, he has a creature ability, and then he has two triggered abilities. And so he works. So he's designed to be just like the other gods as far as working the same mechanically. He's a boar god and not a zombie god, so he's slightly different flavor wise, but it's sort of part of that cycle. Okay, next up, we return to Theros. So we went back to Theros, like, okay, well, we're back in Theros. So we had a lot of talk of, like, we had moved away from kind of how gods functioned when we had went to other worlds. So we're like, okay, well, do we want to learn that? Like, well, we've seen these gods before. They worked a certain way. And so we decided that we were going to retreat back to the way they worked. So, for example, once again, it's the same 5 monocolors: Heliod, Thassa, Erebos, Perforos, and Nylea. One thing, by the way, I didn't mention real quickly that we did do that was kind of fun in the original Theros is we made equipment for each of the 5 major gods, and those equipment appeared as their own cycle as legendary artifact enchantments, which is the first time I think we had done artifact enchantments. And they're legendary to boot. So anyway, something cool we had done I forgot to mention. Okay, anyway, so we come back, we're like, okay, they're going to be legendary enchantment creatures again, because that's what the Theros god, legendary enchantment creature god. We made them indestructible. We did have a lot of discussion of whether they're supposed to be indestructible or not. Just cause from play design, it's indestructible things are not that fun. But okay, we gave them the same devotion, so you have to have a devotion of 5 to your color to become a creature. And then we gave them all a triggered ability, and then we gave them an activated ability. So it's pretty similar. Well, I guess the first time they came, they were all static abilities. Well, they weren't all static. I guess some were static and some were triggered. But this time when we went back, we made them all, I think they're all triggered. No, they're not. Porphos isn't triggered. So, okay, it's a combination. And neither is Nihilea. So it's it's a combination of some are triggered, some are static abilities. But they have an ability that's much like a enchantment, and they have an activated ability. And so the idea is you can use your activated ability to do your thing. And usually the activated ability and the static ability had synergy between them. For example, Heliod says when you gain life, you put a +1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control. And its activated ability gives something lifelink. So it enables you to gain life so that you can do the other ability. And the cards all have that synergy between them. That's designed by how we made them. And once again, we had a big conversation about what gods we wanted to include in Return to Theros. And we finally decided, there was talk of should we bring back all 15. The problem was it was just too much to fit in one set. And so what we decided was we wouldn't do that. And so what we did is we brought back 2 gods. Well, I should say we brought back 1 god and then introduced a brand new god. So Athreos, a major part of the story is about, or the main story is about Elspeth breaking out of the underworld, right? And so in order to do that, we're like, okay, Athreos played a big role. Like, okay, Athreos should be in the set. So we had Athreos in the set. The other one, Clothias, is when Xenagos had taken over, we needed there to be a vacancy so that he could take over. But we had talked about the former Red-Green God, and so when you go to the underworld, you meet the Red-Green God. And Clothias is sort of our... we had wanted to do something that was kind of inspired by Aphrodite. I think this is our Aphrodite-inspired one. Or actually, I take that back. It ended up being God of Destiny. For a while, it was like God. It was more Aphrodite, but we did change that. But anyway, so we did make Clothias and Athreos. Okay, so the next time we do gods, it is Norse mythology. So you can see our mythology influence sets are the ones that make the gods most of the time. Okay, so this time we want to do something different. We really knew that we didn't want to do indestructible. But we had a tool at our disposal that ended up being pretty cool, which is we had modal double face cards. And early on, we got across this idea of what if our variant of Thor had a hammer. So like one side would be our Thor variant, and the other side would be his hammer. And so we really got into this idea of what if we use the MDFCs to be the mechanic for our gods. So in Kaldheim, other than there's 4 dual lands that's finishing a cycle from Zendikar Rising. Other than those dual lands, every mortal double face card in the set is a god, and they are a god on one side, and they are something else on the other side. And we really had fun saying, what kind of cool things can we do? The first one we came up with the idea of what Toralf was our Thor stand-in, and he had hammer. That made a lot of sense. The next one we came up with was Alrin, which is our Odin-like character, would have a raven, because Odin had ravens, and we thought it was kind of cool. And once again, we thought it was neat to change it up. So, like, Toralf has equipment on the backside. Alrund has a creature on the backside. The next one we came up with was Valky. So Valky, God of Lies, which is kind of like our Loki. The back of it is Tybalt, because it turns out that Tybalt's pretending to be the God of Lies. It it was a very low-key moment, or ironically, he's pretending to be the god of lies. But there's a lot of trickery there, and we thought that it was fun, and Tybalt was one of our main bad guy. So anyway, we thought that was fun. So those are the first three we came up with. And then we came up with some other. So Esrika, or no, sorry, not Esrika. Who has the... let's see, Helvar. Helvar had a sword. So Helvar got a battle. He was another one we gave an equipment to. So he had the masterful sword he played. Raydane had the protector shield. So that we did like in white. We did a bunch of warrior stuff with a lot of warrior things. Cosmina got the voyage, got a ship. So we had a vehicle. We thought it was cool to have some vehicles. Egon, god of death, had his throne on the back. Tegrid, god of fright, had a lantern. Bergi, god of storytelling, had a horn. Esrika was one of the fun ones, had the prismatic bridge. So that is our Heimdall stand-in. And so the idea is there's a rainbow bridge in Norse mythology. So the idea that we do a prismatic bridge, we made a 5-color. So that was pretty fun. Jorn, on the backside, has his staff. And Kolvari has the crest. So mostly what we did is we kind of thought what were cool and innovative things that made a lot of sense as things it could be. So some are objects, some are creatures, one's a planeswalker. We had a lot of fun of sort of finding things. And the idea that's neat is if you play the god and then later on draw a second copy with a legendary, so now you can play the flip side and you play the other thing, and they're made to be synergistic. So if you played Thor and put it, and then when you draw it again and play his hammer, Thor is good with his hammer. It works well together. That was the idea there. Okay, so next up, the next time God showed up was in Modern Horizons 2 on Selvin of Sea and Sky. I'm trying to remember. This is where I'm losing my lore. This is a character that was from an existing world, but I don't remember what world. Does it say it's from Merfolk? So this was a Merfolk god that we had talked about previously in another story, and I thought it was fun. Like now that we had a bunch of gods under our belt, and up to this point, all the gods had been gods from mythological inspired worlds. But finally, Sevlin was a god we'd invented for another world that, a lot of times we'll invent gods, but it was kind of fun to finally sort of make a god and show it. So that was cool to do that. It was literally a god from another story we had done. Finally, the last two gods are Asmodeus the Archfiend and Tiamat. So these were both in the Dungeon Dragon set, Adventures in Forgotten Realm. These are both characters from Dungeon Dragons that are gods in Dungeon Dragons. And so it allowed us to use the creature type. Now, the one thing about Selvin and Asmodeus and Tiamat is they aren't part of a cycle. We sort of just made them to be what the story was of that god. And so we were able to do that. So these were just top downs. All the previous gods had been cycles because they had been part of pantheons of different worlds. And these were just one-ofs. So we got to do cool things, just one-ofs. But I think what happened was we had done enough gods under our belt that these things are in the stories gods. Okay, we can call them gods. And we started making more one-of gods, which we hadn't done really prior to these last three. But it was kind of fun. And Tiamat was... let us do some splashy things. And one of the things that's really interesting is early Magic, we made gods, but we didn't call them gods. There wasn't a creature type god. But once we started cementing gods and once we sort of got our, we had made gods something that was established, between Theros and Amonkhet and Kaldheim. Okay, gods are a thing we do, that we started letting us individually start to make gods. And I think now that we sort of have gotten a little bit more comfortable with God as a creature type, you will see us using it in places where it makes sense. Kind of what this last year has taught us between Modern Horizons and Adventures in Forgotten Realms is, hey, if something in story is a god, hey, we have that tool in our toolbox and we can make it a god. We've also sort of said, hey, we can be, gods can be a little more we definitely want the feeling of a god, and we want gods in a similar world, in a pantheon, to feel similar to one another, but gods don't have to be indestructible. Gods don't have to, we have some flexibility in how we can do it. And I think over time, we found a bunch of really fun ways to do it. And that's one of the neat things about the god creature type has been, we've really experimented, and like in each of the, like, I think the Theros gods and the Amonkhet gods and the Kaldheim gods all really felt like gods. They were a pantheon. They did their own thing, but they each did the thing differently and felt like gods in their own way. And I think, that was a lot of fun. And one of the reasons I want to talk about gods today is it really has been an interesting exploration as we played with it, figuring out how we can do and what we could do with it. And really with time, I think we started being really tight in what it had to be, and we've expanded with time. So I do think the future of gods is much more open. And I do think as we find places to do them, we're going to be more willing to use the god creature type. But anyway, guys, I am at my desk, so I've made it to work. So we all know what that means. It means at the end of my drive to work. So instead of talking magic, it's time for me to be making magic. I had fun talking gods today, but it is time for me to go. So I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.